Hey guys, welcome to the Absolutely Unbound podcast where we unpack the latest in American politics and culture. And today will be a very debut episode where we're going to put out our very first episode ever. So it's going to be action packed and we've got some crazy stories for you about all the things that's happened in the last yeah, pretty much a lot of things that's been going for the last week and a half or so. Actually, a lot of things that's been going for the last 4 years, and I've just been delaying myself in getting involved. But now it's a little bit of the right time for me to jump in. So, being a debut episode, we've got some pretty great stories lined up. So, from Trump's fiery UN speech to the looming government shutdown, and then to the Charlie Kirk Memorial that has captured the national attention, and even Trump taking a 180 on his stance with Ukraine. So we're going to get into it, and boy, it is juicy for you. So let's go ahead and dive in. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and run through the stories that we're going to cover today. And that's going to be kind of the structure of how I'm going to be running the show. So we'll have the little intro and then basically a run, probably a 10-minute not really a monologue, but a rundown of the topics that we're going to go through. So first one is Trump at the UN. And Trump at the UN, boy, is it crazy, because Trump basically is going to the UN and giving his world famous speech. Basically just criticizing the UN for everything that they've done and all the things that they are not doing, and how they are essentially affecting U.S. domestic politics and immigration system. And we'll get into that, and it's quite juicy. Second story that we have on here is the looming government shutdown. So Trump has canceled a meeting with top Democrat leaders this week, and it raises real fears of a potential government shutdown if we can't come to an agreement of the next spending bill by September the 30th. So the really big question that we're going to be asking on this topic regarding to the government shutdown is whether, for President Trump, is this really brinkmanship? Or is this some sort of long-term strategy that he's going for? We're going to go ahead and find out. Story 3 that we're going to get into, and this is quite interesting, and this is kind of a piggyback off the first story, is Trump being at NATO, the UN, giving his speech and everything. And also the topics has come up post that speech regarding NATO and Zelensky. And it seems that Zelensky has warned the U.S. that Putin will try every option possible to prolong the war. And Trump even suggesting, which is completely strange, and it's a complete 180 from his stance that he has taken in the last probably 3 months or so, that he is essentially backing Ukraine. And that is an interesting turn of events, so we'll get into that. Story number 4 is we have the free speech debate and the Jimmy Kimmel suspension. And these two things go hand in hand. Now, it's funny that we're talking about free speech when it comes to Jimmy Kimmel. And as we all know, Jimmy Kimmel is probably one of the most divisive late night show hosts that is out there. I mean, he's not the only one. We've got Stephen Colbert, who's just as bad. And then we have Jimmy Fallon, who's kind of hanging on with the worst ratings. But anyways, we're going to get into that because it's kind of a hypocritical topic for Democrats to be essentially coming out and saying that we need to protect free speech when in the last 8 years they have done nothing but censor every single person who did not go along with their policies or ideologies. So we'll get into that, and there is a lot to cover. And the last story, maybe not the last story, but one of the next story we're going to cover is the Charlie Kirk Memorial and the political violence and how the killing of Charlie Kirk has made him a martyr, and what are the ramifications going forward. Is this going to be the regular trend of U.S. politics to constantly have violence? Or are we on course to basically correct ourselves? So we'll get into that. And if we have time, if we seriously have time, I want to get into the major Trump breakthrough regarding, well, I'm not going to even say it. I'll let Trump take the pronunciation, but regarding Tylenol and autism. But we'll go ahead and switch to that in time. All right, so let's go ahead and hit our first story. So our first story is Trump at the UN. So let's see. Trump has major criticisms of NATO and the UN because he essentially is pointing out that they are completely worthless. And this is absolutely true because, as we have seen in the past, that the UN really, they're not even a national body. They're not a state. But they're holding on to this power as being capable to dictate to the rest of the world how we should be pursuing our policies. And it just doesn't make sense because, as Trump says, they're essentially paper pushers. So I'm going to go on here and go to the Hill website and get the key takeaways from the actual UN speech himself that Trump made, because it's pretty hilarious. So give me a second here. Anyway, okay, let's see. All right, so let's get into this. It's because essentially Trump is going in there and saying to all of the UN nations that your country's going to hell. And I'm going to let Trump take it himself in the speech that he's going to make. In the speech that he is going to make. So we will go on from there. And I am currently getting phone calls left and right because we're getting updated constantly of the news that's going on in the world. And let's see. Jesus, I really freaking hate advertisements. You know that online? It just pisses me off. Okay, here we go. Let's get right into the actual speech himself. The clip that Trump made. Okay.
And their suicidal energy ideas will be the death of Western Europe if something is not done immediately. This cannot be sustained. What makes the world so beautiful is that each country is unique. But to stay this way, every sovereign nation must have the right to control their own borders. You have the right to control your borders, as we do now, and to limit the sheer numbers of migrants entering their countries and paid for by the people of that nation that were there and that built that particular nation at the time. They put their blood, sweat, tears, money into that country, and now they're being ruined. Proud nations must be allowed to protect their communities and prevent their societies from being overwhelmed by people they have never seen before, with different customs, religions, with different everything. Where migrants have violated laws, lodged false asylum claims, or claimed refugee status for illegitimate reasons, they should, in many cases, be immediately sent home. And while we will always have a big heart for places and people that are struggling and truly compassionate, answers will be given. We have to solve the problem, and we have to solve it in their countries, not create new problems in our countries. And we are very helpful to a lot of countries that are just not able to send their people anymore. They used to send them to us in caravans of 25,000, 30,000 people each. These massive caravans of people pouring into our country, totally unchecked and unvetted. But not anymore. According to the Council of Europe, in 2024, almost 50% of inmates in German prisons were foreign nationals or migrants. In Austria, the number was 53% of the people in prisons were from places that weren't from where they are now. In Greece, the number was 54%. And in Switzerland, beautiful Switzerland, 72% of the people in prisons are from outside of Switzerland. When your prisons are filled with so-called asylum seekers who repaid kindness, and that's what they did, they repaid kindness with crime. It's time to end the failed experiment of open borders. You have to end it now. See, I can tell you, I'm really good at this stuff. Your countries are going to hell. In America, we've taken bold action to swiftly shut down uncontrolled migration. Once we started detaining and deporting everyone who crossed the border, and removing illegal aliens from the United States, they simply stopped coming. They're not coming anymore. We're getting a lot of credit, but they're not coming anymore.
Okay, so I kind of want to take it back a
Switzerland.
little bit.
When your prisons are filled with so-called asylum seekers who repaid kindness, and that's what they did, they repaid kindness with crime. It's time to end the failed experiment of open borders. You have to end it now. See, I can tell you, I'm really good at this stuff. Your countries are going to hell. In America, we've taken bold action to swiftly shut down uncontrolled.
Okay, I have to say that Trump basically coming out and telling the UN that your countries are going to hell. Ooh, I mean, Trump is going for the jugular for these guys because the UN for, the first term essentially laughed at him at the first speech that he gave. And Trump took it like a freaking man. If you saw the first speech he ever gave to the UN. And I think the UN leaders dreaded knowing that Trump was going to come and actually give this second speech because they knew what was coming. And for him to come out and say, your country's going to hell, and you guys are basically doing nothing but essentially writing letters and patting people on the back and essentially trying to do this whole open border thing for globalism, it's kind of stupid. But let's go ahead and continue and let Trump finish his last bit.
Migration. Once we started detaining and deporting everyone who crossed the border and removing illegal aliens from the United States, they simply stopped coming. They're not coming anymore. We're getting a lot of credit, but they're not coming anymore.
And that's essentially true. Now, what we have to understand about the whole illegal immigration issue and why it's so important and why the UN is taking a particular stance on it is because you have to understand the UN is not a state entity. They are an amalgamation of essentially a mediating device for world nations. It was a product of something that came after World War II, but originally formed as part of the League of Nations after the Great War, which is what we all know as World War I under Woodrow Wilson. Now, without having any real power, if you can really see, the UN is essentially ruled by a group of oligarchs, and usually the top 1%. And the top 1% doesn't mean you're billionaires, but the top 1% can be, people that are outside the political system that want complete control. I mean, wink, wink, George Soros, wink, wink. I mean, that's going to be one of those people. And the reason why they're pushing so much for increased illegal immigration, increased immigration in general, and this is just my opinion, is that they want to create a globalist system to where there are no borders, there are no countries, there are no ethnicity, no nothing. There is just the socialist system, a socialist, globalist utopia. And that's exactly what they want. And this is why they're pushing it. And if you want to really look into it, when you do your full research on the UN, you can look at this. Like, it's all over the internet. You can ask ChatGPT, you can ask Grok, you can ask any AI out there, that the UN has actually been funding I think around $88 million to help illegal migrants enter the US. And not just give them $88 million, they also give these illegal immigrants subsidy debit cards so that they're able to buy food along the way on their journey to the United States. Now that is effed up on so many levels. And for us as the US, the most powerful nation in the world with the strongest economy on the planet, to just take it lying down, we've been doing it for much too long under the progressive Democrat leadership. And look, as my stance, a lot of people will say that I am a strong Trumper, I'm conservative. No, I am not. I literally take a middle ground on most things. I do lean a little bit conservative just because that I believe in the freedom of free speech. I really do believe in the inherent freedom of free speech, and I believe in gun rights, and I also believe in the separation of church and state, and I also believe family values. I hold that very important because I see as the democratic ideology of socialism and communism as lacking entirely of any humanizing substance or fear of a higher power. And when humans are no longer fearful of a higher power, we have this situation where we try to play God. Anyways, so let's break off of that and get further into the story because I am getting way too carried away. Okay, so President Trump warns that the countries are going to hell if they embrace the green energy transition. This is what we've been talking about. It makes no sense. Okay, now, this is going to connect to our later story, but it's worth it bringing it up here. It's that the NATO and the UN has been pushing for, well, NATO specifically, has been pushing for a long time to keep the Ukrainian war going. Now, the irony of the whole thing is that they're essentially painting Russia as the boogeyman, the evil, like the fascists, the evil empire coming back. It's going to be the old Soviet Union. It's going to be the Cold War all over again. Well, with all that though, and then we constantly, over the last, I believe, 8 years or so, been putting sanctions on Russia, and we've been kind of stacking sanctions, removing them, stacking them, removing them, and none of it seems to work. Well, here's the problem. We're probably seeing on the news, and you're probably wondering, okay, if we're putting so much economic pressure on Russia, how come they still have the capabilities to mobilize their forces, to logistically move military supplies and fuel and everything that's needed onto the front, and their economy is still somewhat functioning? Well, the truth is, guys, while NATO is pushing for its alliance to continue the war with Russia, Europe as a whole is still buying oil and natural gas from Russia to power their nations and their cities and everything. This is how ridiculous it is. So it's like basically, hey, we're going to take your candy. The analogy is, hey, Russia, we're going to take your candy away, but here, we're going to give you some cake. So at least you can feel good a little bit about yourself. It's kind of stupid. Anyways, okay, let's go through the list one more time. Okay, so Trump also hit on his many favorite domestic themes, touting his deployment in the National Guard to D.C., and tax cuts and global tariffs. Well, the global tariffs, a lot of people will say that it has no effect on the economy, but I say you're wrong. If you actually go and look on how much we've gained on global tariffs, is I think the last count that we've checked is about $33 billion. That's a significant amount. I mean, it's essentially chump change for what the country needs to get us back on track, but it's a good step in the right direction. Okay. The UN wasn't there for us. Trump attacked the UN as an irrelevant body that has failed in its mission to ensure global security and stability, a criticism that diplomats and UN officials acknowledge, but argue requires renewed commitments and engagement rather than withdrawal. Well, here's the thing, guys. What has the UN really done for the US? I mean, the UN is essentially a peacemaking apparatus that was created and fronted by the United States, Britain, and France. But for some reason, I don't know how it happened, over the course of the last, 80 years, The U.S. has been footing the bill on paying for all of the United Nations' missions. I mean, we've led every single UN mission, almost, or we've been involved in somehow, whether financially, militarily, or logistically. We've done it all, and we have been footing the bill. And what's the point for us to continue being a part of the UN if we're not going to be shown as an equal partner? And an equal partner means the United States doesn't get to foot 80% of the bill. No, the rest of the nations in the UN has to pay into that system as well. So there is an equilibrium of all nations that we're supporting each other through the cause. Because right now is essentially what we're seeing is a bunch of people, well, you know, what it sounds like is a bunch of kids going, we want this, we want transgender care, we want immigration, we want this, we want that, but we don't want to pay for it. We're going to go to our grandma and try to get that money. That's essentially what it sounds like. And US is that grandma. It's fucking stupid. Okay, now let's keep going. And it says, let's see what Trump has says. All they seem to do is write a strongly worded letter and then never follow that letter up, which is true. It's like, hey, we don't like what you're doing. We're going to write you. Okay, what are you going to do about it? We're going to write you some more letters. So it's just Russia, for example. Don't invade Ukraine. What does Putin say? Okay. 2 days later, he does it fucking anyways. There it is. I mean, it's the same bullshit. Anyways, let's continue. Trump says it's empty words, and empty words don't solve war. Well, he's got a point there. I mean, hey, how long has the UN been in Africa? Okay? How long has the UN been trying to solve this whole situation with the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda? It's been like 20 years. Trump comes into office, the second term, literally within 4 months, he starts the negotiation process. He straight up starts the process. So what's going on? What's this discrepancy? How come the UN is not able to do their job that they promised to do? It's freaking ridiculous. Okay. Let's move on. The president also touted his role as helping to broker ceasefires in several conflicts, claiming the U.S. had not offered assistance with his efforts. Well, that's true. The UN definitely did not help with Thailand or Cambodia. They just kind of sat back and watched it happen. And basically Trump has to step in and basically kind of intimidate them with sanctions and tariffs. So yeah. While Trump has ended U.S. participation in some UN bodies and cut all foreign aid that helped fund humanitarian initiatives, the president told UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres that the U.S. is behind the United Nations 100% during the bilateral meeting later in the day. Now, a lot of people are probably going to take that phrase and say that Trump is hypocritical because there is no way to still be behind the UN without fully committing to all of their initiatives. Now, that's wrong. I think it's inherently wrong because a lot of the humanitarian initiatives that's being pushed by the UN makes no sense. There's no reason why we need to fund transgender care in Africa. There's no reason why we need to send money for LGBTQ plus minus comma exclamation mark whatever the damn alphabet soup of that group is to promote that movement in other countries. It's stupid. And the U.S. has the choice to not back certain parts of the UN and their agendas that they're trying to pursue. And Trump is basically flexing his muscle and saying, hey, if you guys don't shape up, you guys don't actually put out agendas and policies that make sense, that we all can get by, that benefits the actual impoverished nations of the world and actually help developing nations to actually build their economy and set their own destinies, we don't want to be a part of it. And this is a great move by him. Okay, now the second point. Trump went ahead and deflects blame for stalled Gaza, Ukraine talks. Well, let's see what's going on. I don't know much about that. So Trump acknowledged the challenge he's faced in trying to end Russia's war in Ukraine and secure a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip, but blamed other countries for sitting back. Oh no, for setting back his efforts on both fronts. Trump said the U.S. was prepared to impose a very strong and round of powerful tariffs on Russia, but said it would be ineffective unless Europe stopped importing oil from Moscow. This is what we were talking about. A trade he claimed he only became aware of 2 weeks ago. Trump, Mr. President, I'm not sure if you actually realize this, but this has been going on since your first administration. And Europe has been going back and forth on this for a while. So I have said this to a lot of people on the very beginning, before I even got into this whole podcast, was that if you really looked at the research, because I was pretty interested in the whole, the EU Green Initiative, and I wanted to really research it because I wasn't really looking for holes in the argument. I was looking on how we could, if it was really effective, if it was really possible, and EU really were doing something that was revolutionary as far as in the realm of green energy, I wanted to see whether, they had something, they were doing something that we weren't, and that we should jump on the bandwagon as well. But the more I looked further, is that you begin to realize that during the entire time, in the last, I would say, 20 years or so, Europe has essentially been moving towards the whole green energy initiative. And one of the green energy initiatives, one of the points was that they wanted to move to all renewable forms of energy, which was, we're talking like windmills, we're talking, solar panels, we're talking everything, essentially green energy. But the problem was they were also taking down nuclear reactors. Now, there's a lot of negative connotations and negative, opinions regarding nuclear because of, obviously, the weapons, the ability to weaponize such elements for the worst things. And also, we have the scare of Chernobyl, Three Mile Island, and all that meltdown, Fukushima. So there were meltdowns, and we're not going to deny it. Yes, it did happen. But to say that we needed to remove all of the nuclear reactors all throughout Europe, and say that windmills and solar panels were a much better form of energy, whoever is doing those research must be the dumbest person on the planet. Because, okay, windmills are probably the most toxic form of energy production, because those fans are made, those windmill fans and all the posts are made with toxic materials. And on top of that, they only retain about 30% of the energy that's actually produced. And it is the same with solar panels. Now, solar panels has obviously gotten better. So we're sitting at about, I think we're sitting at about somewhere between 40 to 50% energy retention from solar panels. Don't take my word for it. I don't know. I am just going based off of numbers that I've researched in the past. The technology has gotten better, but still, we are talking about highly hazardous, degrading material for solar panels. And on top of that, if you've ever gone to solar farms, they are hideous. You will see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds square miles of beautiful land just covered with these black things all across the plain. And they're all over. Like if you go come here where we're located in the state of Idaho, and you drive out to the central Idaho, you will see nothing but solar farms. And it is ridiculous. you take away valuable land that could be used for agricultural production to actually make food that can help the community, and instead putting this ridiculous solar farms that really doesn't produce the energy that you need. And instead, what we should be moving to is towards micro nuclear reactors, which I will admit the French have something going, and I think we should be following that. But to bring it all back, see, this is how I tell you I get really off topic a lot when I talk about certain topics. That's pretty passionate about. Anyways, so we're back to the whole oil thing. So the U.S. in the last 8 years or so, during the whole Russian war and everything, has been constantly putting sanctions and applying tariffs on Russian goods. But the problem is, you can kind of see Putin really doesn't feel anything. And you always wonder, how is Putin able to constantly send troops out there? How is he able to constantly have oil in the front? How is he able to still produce tanks and send soldiers out to the front and have the logistical capacity to constantly do that in a prolonged war? And the surprise would be, even if we try to put a string of strong tariffs on Russia, it will affect nothing on their economy because Europe does not stop importing oil from Moscow. Case in point, case study, Germany. This is probably one of the strongest points. So Germany had nuclear reactors, but as part of their lunacy and socialist agenda and progressive thing that they're going after, they want to go the whole clean energy. So they got rid of all of their nuclear reactors. But instead, they switched to turning all their coals again, all their coal plants. And they're claiming, oh, we're burning clean coal. If anybody understands the chemical composition of coal and how it burns, there's no such thing as clean coal. Just think about that. So while they're pushing this green energy deal, they're burning more coal than ever because they need to power their country. And to subsidize that, they've been buying oil from the Russians to also power their fuel reactors. So yeah, there's a lot of things going on. So anyways, let's move to the next point. Okay. Trump calls climate change the greatest con job ever perpetrated. Okay. Trump reserved some of his most aggressive remarks on rejecting global efforts to rein in fossil fuels to promote renewable clean energy. He called climate change the greatest con job ever perpetrated in the world and repeated his contempt for wind power as pathetic and bad. I literally just talked about this. I'm not going to get to it anymore. You're supposed to make money with energy, not lose money, he said. Well, he's got a point there. All green is all bankrupt. Yeah, he's right. All right, and let's move on. We have his remarks stood in contrast with Guterres, who warned the plenary that the climate crisis is accelerating. Clean energy future is not a distant promise. It's already here. No government, industry, or special interest may stop it. Okay. So this guy, Guterres, look, I'm all about green energy. I'm all about saving the planet. I'm all about protecting the environment, okay? But in able to do that, you have to understand the science behind the green energy. Now, if we look at the studies today, if we look at biology, and we look at trees and how trees work, okay? So trees rely on CO2 to essentially grow, to essentially survive. It takes in CO2 and then it releases oxygen for us to breathe. And the more CO2 that's produced into the atmosphere, the more these plants take in, because these plants, the plants have pores. I don't know if they're called pores. I'm not a botanist, so so correct me if I'm wrong. But as far as I know, plants have these little pores that are there, and with more CO2 that it takes in, it's able to close up those pores and retain more water, and essentially also produce more oxygen. So if we really look at the statistics, if we look at the greening statistics that's being provided by scientists out there, you can look at the research, you can go ahead and look on ChatGPT, Gemini, whatever AI thing you want to do, or Google, whatever, if you want to be old age like that. We are at a point in our planet that the earth has never been greener. Okay? There is 20% more green growth, new green growth on our planet than ever before. 20%. What's 20%? 20% literally is twice the size of the continental United States. Imagine that. So with this whole green energy thing and the proponents of it trying to tell us that we are ruining the environment, we're killing the trees, we're killing that, it's weird how they don't actually mention the fact that, hey, our planet's actually greener than it's ever been, and we're actually in a cooling period, not a warming period. Like, we're not warming up. If you realize what's going on in the world today, our planet is not getting any hotter. It's getting colder. I'm in Idaho, and I could tell. It's like during the summers, it's like, yeah, it gets hot, but it was nowhere near as hot as in the last couple of years. So we have been going towards a downward slope in temperature. So the whole global warming narrative just doesn't really fit. And I don't really think that a lot of these green energy scientists and proponents really understand what's going on, or they're just blatantly trying to hide the fact because they're overcommitted in the agendas that they're in, and there's too much money involved. So they're trying to do everything possible to cash out as much as possible, even though they know they effed up. Anyways, all right, let's move on. Anyways, all right, so Guterres, whatever the hell his name is, he probably should read a book and take his facts and shove it. Anyways, okay. Countries going to hell because of immigration. Well, that's a big one. Okay, I got to play that clip one more time. When Trump says, your country's going to hell. Yeah.
Failed experiment of open borders. You have to end it now. See, I can tell you. I'm really good at this stuff. And that's what they did. They repaid kindness with crime. It's time to end with so-called asylum seekers, the people in prisons, from where they are now. In Greece, the number was 54%, and in Switzerland, beautiful Switzerland, 72% of the people in prisons are from outside of Switzerland. When your prisons are filled with so-called asylum seekers who repaid kindness, and that's what they did. They repaid kindness with crime. It's time to end the failed experiment of open borders. You have to end it now. See, I can tell you. I'm really good at this stuff. Your countries are going to hell. In America,
your countries are going to hell. Oh God. Okay, let's go back to it. I love how Trump just doesn't give a shit what he says. Anyways. Okay, countries are going to hell because of migration. Trump painted a dystopian picture as he framed illegal immigration a threat to history and culture of countries. If you live in the United States, and especially you live in the southern borders, well, unless you're California, because California is essentially a communist state, and they don't really give a shit about any of their citizens. If you go to any other state, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, all of those southern states, they're having serious issues, and it is uprooting their entire community. Okay. Proud nations must be allowed to protect their communities and prevent their societies from being overwhelmed by people they have never seen before, with different customs, religions, with different everything, he said. Yes, that is absolutely true, because there is a case in point here in the United States that if you go to Dearborn, Michigan, the population is 39% Muslim. And look, I don't have anything against Muslim. My dad is a Shia Muslim. I grew up, I knew the religion, I've read the Quran, I've done everything. So I have no hate against Muslims. What I do have something against is that immigrants, Muslim immigrants coming to our country, changing and uprooting the entire local community and not wanting to assimilate. And they're coming into this country and claiming death to America, burn America, and that they hate this country. If you freaking hate this country so bad, get the F out of here. Seriously. It's like, look, I'm not trying to be an alt-right proponent or a MAGA guy or anything. It's like, I'll admit, I did vote for Trump. Am I MAGA? I don't know. It's still a work in progress, and I'm still trying to figure it out. There's stuff that I like a lot of policy that Trump does, but there also are some things that I disagree with. And I'm not going to get into that. But going into it, Dearborn, Michigan, let's put it for example. You have a population that's 39% Muslim. And those people in Dearborn, those white people, or the people that have been there for generations, must be the nicest person on the planet to let this shit happen. It's crazy. They've elected in a mayor of the city who basically just told one of their citizens in a town hall that if you don't like Sharia law, that if you don't like the Muslim agenda that we're pushing here, you can get out because you are the problem. You are the Islamophobe. I don't agree with that logic at all. It's like, if you're going to come into a country and you're not willing to assimilate, and you're not being willing to be a part of that culture, you have no position of being there. Just think about it. If you go to Saudi Arabia, let's do that. If you go to Saudi Arabia and you go, hey, I want you to identify me as they, them. Guess what? You go there, do that, you're going to be was, were. You go to China and you say, I want you to open your borders. I want you to accept Sharia law. And I want you to recognize me as pure Muslim. You know what China's going to do? They're going to go, we're going to recognize you as was, were. Because you're going to die. So the fact that these I don't have a problem with immigrants. I'm an immigrant myself. But the problem with these new wave of immigrants that are coming in, they are so ignorant in their ways and not willing to assimilate and thinking that their way of life was so great. Okay, look, if your way of life was so great, why'd you come here? Why'd you come to achieve the American dream? It's like, America is the greatest country on the planet. You know why? And I will tell you, American, actually taking the words from the great Charlie Kirk himself, rest his soul and his family. America is such a great country that on the planet, and it's the only singular planet, the only singular nation on the planet that the people that hate the nation refuse to leave. That's all. Like all the celebrities that you see, we're gonna move out of the country. Go! We don't want you here. You got Samuel L. Jackson, you got Mark Ruffalo. Well, Ellen DeGeneres actually went to Canada, so that's out of the picture. Robert De Niro. You've got all these people that are saying, fascists, I'm gonna leave America. You're still freaking here. Nobody asked you to be here. You can go, man. You don't think that you're relevant. Anyways, I'm getting carried away. Let's move on to the next point. Okay, we have to solve the problem, and we have to solve it in their countries, not create new problems in our countries. Yes, Trump, this is something that I have said for a long time, and I've gotten a lot of trouble during my time in my studying for my political science degree, is that to solve the problem, a human problem, okay, is that if we're talking about nationalism in general, no people of any nation actually wants to leave their country unless they absolutely have to. Nobody wants to leave everything that they know, their entire family structure, their entire culture, to go into a country and take a chance, unless they absolutely have to. Now, for example, the issue with Mexico. Why is Mexico, like I'm using Mexico as an example here. So we have, in America, we have a problem with Mexican illegal immigration. Well, if if we're really thinking about it, illegal immigration, I mean, the illegal immigration, the Mexico illegal immigration issue is, there's so much nuances to it that it could be an episode, an entire episode all on its own, because right now, yes, it was true that there were massive amounts of Mexicans that came into the United States illegally to be a part of the illegal workforce. But as we've seen with the whole caravan movement and everything like that, it's no longer just Mexicans, and now it's everybody. I mean, we're talking, you've got Indians coming to the southern border, you've got Chinese coming to the southern border, you've got Turkish coming to the southern border, you've got Africans coming to the southern border, you got everybody, and a lot of the Latinos that are coming through the southern borders. A majority of them aren't even Mexicans. We've got Guatemalans, we've got Hondurans, we've got Brazilians, we've got, I mean, you got Venezuelans especially. They're all coming. And the best way for us to tackle this problem, especially in the case of the United States, is that a lot of these problems that people come into the United States because there is very low opportunity in their countries. So if we take Mexico as the case study, okay, what does Mexico have right now, and what do they lack? Mexico has a very strong labor force. I mean, their reproduction rate is decent, and they have lots of land. A lot of it is still underdeveloped. They currently produce a lot of the agricultural products that the U.S. imports, especially tropical fruits and things like that. Now, what they don't have is a strong manufacturing side of the country. But if you have such a strong workforce that is already there in the country, doesn't it make sense for us as a country, the United States, to invest in Mexico to help them develop the industrial apparatus and manufacturing apparatus, so that way their people do not have to take that trek and take that risk to come across the borders and using the coyotes to come across and being forced into heinous things such as, child trafficking, sex workers, sex trafficking, and things like that. And if we can do that from the beginning and actually be serious about it, this is actually an issue that can solve itself. Why not invest in their countries? Why don't American companies invest in their countries, the countries that we are having illegal immigration problems from, developing their economy and keeping their workforce in their country? In that way, it's twofold, because with a stronger workforce that you have and higher paid workforce, okay, you're going to solve the cartel issues altogether. Because look, the cartels can make billions of dollars, but they are not going to make billions of dollars like the way a massive manufacturing powerhouse corporation is going to make. So do I think there is a solution to the illegal immigration problem? Yes, there absolutely is. Are we willing to do it on our end? Trump is willing to do it. And in all of the case studies, in all of the research and everything, it's already been predicted within the next 20 years, Mexico is going to be the manufacturing powerhouse of North America, if not the world. The United States will still remain a very, very strong economy, probably the strongest. But that relationship between US and Mexico, once it cements itself and once it fully develops, it's going to be unstoppable. And this is what we have to look out for. But that's one of the key takeaways from this, and how I can relate it to what we're talking about. So let's move on. This first story is actually really taking a long time to get through. Anyways. Okay, country's going to hell because of migration. We have to solve there. Yep. Okay. Moments of levity amid the aggression. Okay. Trump was able to trigger some laughters from what was largely a stone-faced audience. Well, It probably was a stone-faced audience because these a-holes, these are the same a-holes that made fun of Trump in his first UN speech. And they laughed at him. Remember, go online and watch the first UN speech that he ever gave. They freaking laughed at him, okay? So I don't feel any sympathies for them. Calling out a technical difficulty with the teleprompter early in his speech and a broken escalator. Okay, now, this might be a moot point, but I'd like to mention it. So the whole teleprompter thing and the escalator thing. Now, there were other speakers that went on before Trump. There were other dignitaries that went to UN building before Trump, and they didn't have a problem. Their escalator was working. Everything was working fine. Teleprompters were working. But why is it that when Trump gets into the building, the moment he gets into the building, the escalator was working fine. And then the moment he steps right up to the escalator, damn thing shuts down. And it didn't just shut down. It wasn't like a technical issue where it shut down for a second or two. It was shut down for 10 seconds, 10 whole seconds. And now, if anybody's in the security world, okay, like Secret Service, private security, anything like that, 10 seconds is an eternity to have your asset exposed, okay? I don't know who is going about this, and I'm not playing the blame game, but this is not normal. Because maybe your intention was trying to mess with Trump, okay, because you don't like him. But the fact that you exposed him for 10 seconds next to an escalator that doesn't work and he's just standing there, that is a huge security risk. And you should be ashamed of yourselves. And on top of it, the teleprompter. First, Trump gets in there. If you notice, all the speeches were given, the audio system was working fine. All the audio, the volume levels, and everything was great. But the moment Trump gets on there, they have technical issues. They have audio issues. The teleprompter stopped working. That doesn't seem right. And I have to give credit to Trump. He made light out of it. He knew somebody was messing with him. I would know if somebody's messing with me. Trump knew somebody was messing with him, and he played it off as a joke. And the best part was, he goes, hey, you know what? The teleprompter doesn't work, but I'm more than happy to not use the teleprompter. And I think they completely miscalculated when they didn't give him a teleprompter, because that teleprompter was essentially controlling the things that he was going to say. And the fact that you turned it off, you gave him a free check to say whatever he wanted. So that's on you, UN. Whoever planned to mess with Trump, it really backfired. Okay, let's move on to the story. These are the two things I got from the United Nations: a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter. Yes, you're great. Okay, it was a rare moment of levity in a speech that was largely aggressive, rightly so. Trump singled out for criticism Germany for its past focus on green energy and migration. We just talked about Germany not too long ago regarding the whole green energy. China and India, primarily funders of Russia's war in Ukraine. True. And Venezuela, saying President Nicolas Maduro directs terrorists and drug traffickers. I don't know much about that one, but if I understand it correctly, Mexico is having a major fentanyl issue and cartel issue in their country. And this new group of cartels that has come out of nowhere and taken the streets by storm and essentially just like rolling all the other cartels over were from Venezuela. And when the Mexican government goes in to do the research to find out who the decision makers are, They cannot find any information on there because it seems to have been purposefully scrubbed. So, food for thought. Okay. Members of the Brazilian delegation were seen scrambling to attach their translation earpieces as Trump turned his attention to them, saying his tariffs are aimed at punishing other countries' domestic policies. But he briefly switched to flattery, describing excellent chemistry in meeting Brazil's President Luiz Ignacio Lula da Silva in a 39-second embrace after Lula's speech. It's a good sign, Trump said, but then added, but also in the past, Brazil, can you believe this, unfairly tariffed our nation. That is absolutely true. Now, we also have to understand, why is Trump targeting Brazil? Okay. So, Brazil's president, Lula da Silva, okay? He is probably the closest representation to an outright socialist and communist. And he won the presidency. I don't know how it happened, but according to the numbers and how the election played out, he essentially bought the election. That's what's being claimed. And one of his first goals coming into office was to put his political opponent, which was the president prior to him, Bolsonaro, in prison. And I believe he has been charged for 25 years. And remember, I think you should also remember the fact that Bolsonaro was considered the Trump of Brazil. And he went through the same thing that Trump went through. The whole hoax of collusion, the hoax of corruption. He went through the whole 9 yards. The only problem is he was not Trump. He did not have, he may have had the clout of character, but he did not have the legal acumen and the skills to debate and get his points across. And he was not a billionaire to spend tons of money in legal fees to defend his point of view and himself. But I'm quite sure that Trump will do something about it, and the increased tariffs that is coming for Brazil is definitely going to turn some heads in that country. Okay, so that's with the first story done. God, we still have like 4 more stories to get through, guys. Okay. Government shutdown. That's what we're going to move into. Okay, government shutdown. Government shutdown. Okay, let's see. All right, so the government shutdown. Trump canceled a meeting with top Democrats this week, raising real fears of government shutdown by September 30th. The big question is this either true brinkmanship or a good strategy? So, let's move into this. Okay, in order to understand this, we have to know what is some of the bills that is being held up in the House, okay? So we have Donald Trump on Tuesday said he would not meet the top Democrats, discussing their demands, keeping funding open, okay, Congress is up against 30 deadline, okay. I have proposed cut funding to, Leader Hakeem Jeffries, okay, healthcare, Republican healthcare, cries out later on True Social is not reading Democrats after we read the details. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so that's basically just giving a mumbo jumbo and stuff, and really not getting to the point. Okay, so what was the disagreements in this new funding bill? Okay, so Republicans are pushing for a clean continuing resolution to extend the current funding levels through mid-November without adding any new policy changes. So essentially what Republicans are asking is just to keep the same spending apparatus and the agreement that we've had since last year. without making any major changes. Now, Democrats want to attach provisions to that continuing resolution as basically they're basically holding the passing of the bill hostage because they want to push through increase healthcare bills and Medicaid bills that increases our government expenditure. And they are, because of this, they are essentially resisting a purely clean extension. Okay? Healthcare subsidies seems to be the top issue because Democrats want to extend and make permanent the enhanced tax credits, the subsidies, under the Affordable Care Act, which the Affordable Care Act and Health and Obamacare Act is just, it was such a sham, such a scam, and the way it went about it was dumb. And I've said this since 2008 when Obama first came into office. Look, I had high hopes for Obama. I had really high hopes that he was going to make changes. I had high hopes that we were going to be able to come to some sort of affordable health care. And when we saw Affordable Care Act, we thought this was going to be, hey, this is going to allow smaller health insurance companies to be able to compete with the big guys and allow them to have a competitive edge when it comes to pricing and everything. But that's really not was the case. What ended up happening was the Affordable Health Care Act had all these regulations that basically put the smaller insurers out of business. And the only big insurers are the ones that are able to survive because they have the billions of dollars to be able to counteract the regulations that were coming. And, you know, based on what I said, you know where I stand because I think that when it comes to healthcare, that is something that we should not mess with. And we should allow the people, the American people, to have a choice of how and where they get their health care. It should not be the federal government to dictate whether they choose to have health care or not. So the Health Care Act are set to expire so that the low and middle income people can continue to afford health care insurance. Well, middle income people, in reality, middle income people cannot afford health care. They under the affordable health care system, it only benefits the extremely rich or the extremely poor. The middle class are essentially the expendables because the middle class has to foot most of the bill because we're the hardworking tax-paying base of the American nation. The 1%, the top billionaires, they have billions of dollars. They have subsidies. They have deductions from the government to where they're not basically paying anything for their healthcare. And healthcare, they can get the platinum plan on the healthcare and it would be chump change for them. The extremely impoverished and the extremely poor, they get advantage because they don't have to pay for any of their health care. They get it completely subsidized. But who actually pays for it? Us, the middle class. And most people don't realize that when they agree with these agendas to increase funding, increase healthcare cost. Okay. Another thing that seems to be the thing that's holding up Democrats from really agreeing on the spending bill is basically they want to reverse the Medicaid cuts. And Democrats want to reverse the cuts on Medicaid and other healthcare programs that Republicans pushed in their one big, beautiful bill. And Republicans are essentially arguing that such health spending increases are beyond what should be included in a short-term funding extension and should be addressed in the broader appropriation process. And that is absolutely true. But Democrats really have a history of trying to bamboozle any spending bill on a last minute basis. And they are very good at filibustering a lot of things. Okay. And what are the reasons for the Medicaid cuts? Well, Medicaid, that's a tough one. And I don't know enough about it to really make a strong argument until I do more research. So I'm just going to keep my opinions to myself. until I get more facts on the matter. Okay, so Republicans essentially are looking for more time to figure out what they can give, what they can appropriate more in this new spending bill, and they're essentially requesting for a longer continuing resolution through to November to really get these bullets dotted and points crossed. Okay, but Democrats are countering it with a shorter extension to force the negotiations. Which, look, if the Democrats are really serious about trying to come to a strong conclusion and a reasonable resolution to the spending bill, they would give the Republicans the time to do it. And we can obviously see that this is not in their interest. They are moving fast because they want their bill, the Medicaid bill, and the healthcare subsidies to continue increasing the overall expenditure of the nation. Okay. And the next one is what's other concerns? So security funding, member security provisions. So House GOP continuing resolution includes additional security funding for Congress, administration, and judiciary of about $88 million. Now, if we see the current violence that is happening in the U.S. today, with two Democrats being shot earlier this week not this week, but earlier this year for agreeing with certain GOP bills. I don't know the names on top of my head of the two Democrat politicians that were shot, and rest their soul, and may they do a full recovery, the one that survived, and the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and the two attempts on President Trump's life. This is logical to push through because politicians, look, whether you're Democrat, whether you're Republican, it doesn't matter. I do not agree to any form of political violence. And if you're going to use political violence as your main tool to get your political agendas across and getting your points heard, that's not the way to properly do it in a democratic society. There's no room for violence. There's no room for heinous acts. We must be able to come to the table through consensus and through dialogue. And that's my take on that. But Democrats have pushed back on certain aspects of that bill, or they want to add guardrails to limit how the executive branch might reallocate or withhold funds. Well, I mean, why are they really concerned about the executive branch? Okay, because essentially when it comes to the reallocating of funds for security reasons and things like that, that is usually done through the House and the Senate. And the only thing the president can do is veto. So I don't know what their real concern is. It's just kind of weird. Anyways, let's move on to the next story. So now that's done, let's move on to the next story. Okay, segment 3. All right, let's go. NATO and Zelensky. So, Ukrainian President Zelensky warned the UN that Putin will try everything to prolong the war. Trump went even further, suggesting NATO allies should shoot down Russian planes if they ever enter their airspace. Okay, so this is a complete 180 from the position that Trump has taken in the last 4 months, where he has promised that he is going to be able to end the war in the Ukraine within the first few months of his administration. Now, look, he didn't live up to the promise, but if anybody knows the nuances of politics, and especially dealing with Putin, and also dealing with a person like Zelensky and all of NATO and everything, you will know that trying to negotiate out a war is not something that you can achieve in such a short amount of time. And, for him to come out and promising that was, concerning. But for him to take a 180, we have to wonder why. Well, it's pretty obvious. Putin's agenda for Russia was that he wants to rebuild the entire Russian Empire and basically gain back all of the countries, gain back of all of the territory that was once part of the greater Soviet Union. And that is his goal. He's said it. He's come out and said it. So if we look at it from that perspective, we can probably rightly assume that Putin is not interested in giving up any type of land. He's not interested in conceding. He's not interested in giving up any of his gains. And he's not really interested in any type of treaties that he would have to give up territory that he has fought for. Now, I understand from his position, but at the same time, Putin really isn't in the best position to be making the negotiations because, for one, Trump's stance against the UN and NATO right now, and basically going out to the UN summit and making that speech regarding the hypocrisy and the irony of Europe constantly telling the world that they must help Ukraine to fight off Russia, while at the same time still importing natural resources like natural gas and oil to power their countries. It makes zero sense. So with this calling out, I can see that European countries will get extremely intimidated by Trump's position and his stance on the matter. And they will do whatever it takes we are a powerful country, so they will do everything possible to make sure that they placate to terms of the United States. This is what I believe. I'm not sure, but you also have to remember the United States is the only country on the planet that could foot the defense bill. The United States is needed in NATO because they are the most powerful country. And to have the backing of the United States is essential to have any credibility on the world stage, especially when it comes to NATO and the UN. So what does this mean? This means that countries like Germany will most likely be looking for alternative sources to obtain oil and natural gas that they need to power their infrastructure, power their entire country, power their economy. And the only way to do that is probably purchase it from the United States or from the Gulf nations. Or there is another avenue that, if we know, with the whole Burisma scandal that Hunter Biden went through and that everybody continues to say is bullshit, even though all of the truth is out there, Ukraine actually holds a huge deposit of natural gas. And if that natural gas can be exploited and a strong diplomatic ties can be built and achieved with Ukraine and the rest of Europe, they essentially will have its own source of natural gas to be able to power the continent. Maybe not the continent, maybe I'm throwing it off, maybe I'm being a little ambitious, but I know that Ukraine has a substantial amount of natural gas that the European nations can use for power. Okay? Okay, now, do I think that Trump is pushing NATO towards dangerous escalation or just signaling strength? I think if I understand Trump correctly and we look at Trump's past actions when it comes to military matters, we know that he's decisive. But he is decisive in strategic and tactical matters. And by tactical, it means limited warfare. So what does limited warfare mean? Limited warfare means a military mission that has a small scope, limited scope, that is a decisive action. Decisive action, what does that mean? The killing of Soleimani. Qasem Soleimani, that is one, where our target was not nation building. Our target was not to invade a country. Our target was not to do a regime change, but our target was to eliminate the person responsible for killing thousands of US soldiers in the Middle East. And Qasem Soleimani has been the sole perpetrator of funding the major terrorist groups in the region, whether it's Hezbollah, Hamas, or the Houthis, or whatever. He has essentially been funding them. And for Trump to take him out in the fashion that he did, that is considered the greatest representation and the most successful limited warfare that we can see. And that's essentially what Trump is going after. If Trump is backing NATO, this is not a dangerous escalation. He wants to posture NATO to show Russia that, hey, you don't have any leg to stand on. NATO has an entire economy of the US behind them. What do you have? What? China? China's a paper tiger. China relies on the US to buy their products because the US, even though we do owe China a substantial amount of money, we have the strongest buying power on the planet. And with that strong buying power on the planet, if we decide one day to go, hey, you know what, Xi Jinping, we don't really want to buy products from you. We're going to shift all of our import goods to be made in Mexico. China would be screwed because the US make up about 35% of the Chinese economy. So our buying power is substantial. So if Putin thinks that he can get the backing of China and India long term, he's going to be gladly mistaken because India is the other power that's out there. But India is quite well known to always take a middle ground. They never really want to be involved in major political issues. They never really cared about anything that much on the world stage. What they really care about is developing their country and quick enough so that it can match the status of other westernized nations as being a first world country. And that is their only goal, and it's a noble goal. But to say that he can get India involved on the geopolitical world stage when it comes to warfare, that's highly unlikely. So now, how does Zelensky's warning about Russia is going to shape U.S. public opinion and the continued involvement in Ukraine? Now, we criticized the Biden administration a lot last time around when he was in office that we were funding billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars into a war that we didn't really even want to. And essentially, with this position, Trump is essentially leaning towards that. But what does this really mean for us? Okay. If I'm going to guess correctly, if I'm going to hypothesize correctly, I think Trump is going to make NATO members pay their fair share. That includes Germany, that includes Spain, that includes Portugal, that includes Finland, that includes Sweden, that includes all of the nations that are members. They're going to pay their fair share as far as the defense costs. And with that being said, the US, I believe, would stand as the secondary backer of Ukraine. So should NATO not be capable to provide financial and military assistance and lend-lease products to the Ukrainian soldiers on the front, the US has the capabilities of doing that. And the US are willing to do that. Now, if that's the stance that Trump takes and that's the path that he's going to choose, I agree with them because it's essentially projecting military power of the United States without actually committing us. And that's what we need to do because at the end of the day, this is Ukraine's war. This is not our war. We can help them by putting pressure on Russia in other ways. But as far as a geopolitical concern, Ukraine really is not on the highest priority of the U.S. Now, it might be on the highest priority of the Democratic Party because we know that a substantial number of Democratic politicians have had shares in the whole Burisma scandal. So that's probably why, the whole Hunter Biden laptop scandal got buried really fast. So anyways, we'll move into that. But that's essentially where I see the U.S. is going. And if that's the case, then I would agree with it. But Trump really has to keep his promise of not getting us involved in Ukraine in a large-scale fashion. And if we are to commit any money to Ukraine, this has to be something that goes through the congressional process in both House and Senate. And it's a decision that needs to be made by the people and not Trump. Okay. Now, could this be another example of Trump using tough talk to score political points at home? If anybody knows Trump better, is that Trump puts his money where his mouth is. Yes. He may talk a lot of smack. Yes. He may put a lot of people down. Rosie O'Donnell. And he may destroy you verbally and anything. I mean, shit. He literally look, I don't know what you think about Ron DeSantis, but Trump making fun of Ron DeSantis as pretty much being on stilts and stools because he was wearing tall cowboy boots that was 4 inches tall. That was freaking hilarious. But anyways, Trump has that capability. That's just him. He is a showman. He is a celebrity. He is an entrepreneur. He will say things that's on top of his mind. But the thing about Trump is that he lives up to his word. Every promise he makes, he is going to do. Now, whether he is successful at it or not, that's another story altogether. But everything that Trump has promised to do, he has done. Every single thing. You can go look up all the bills that he promised and everything. Even though his agendas never got passed, he always made sure he pushed it and at least his bills were on the table. And his ideas were on the table. So there's that. So now let's go ahead and leave the world of international politics. Actually, let's go back because I actually want to show one thing was that Russia is being okay. So here's the thing. Trump called out Russia as essentially being a paper tiger because they are essentially a paper tiger because they are posturing themselves as being ultimately strong in this war and that they are winning. But on the back end, really in their country, their economic system is in shambles. They have lines to the gas station. Lines. People wait for hours to get gas. Okay? And the public opinion towards the war has turned against them because it's been prolonged for far too long. Imagine 3.5 years. So you imagine 3.5 years you've been fighting this war. And the only thing that you have to show for is what? 10% of Ukrainian territory on the eastern side. You've taken parts of the Crimea and you've taken parts of the Donbass. And then you've also taken little small section along the eastern border. And it's been basically static. This is essentially trench warfare that they're going through, and they haven't been able to move because the Ukrainians, you got to give them credit, they are very good at drone warfare. And their suicide drones that they have been using against Russian assets and troops has basically crippled Russia's movements. And Russia is unable to actually logistically deliver the supplies and goods that they need to support their soldiers on the front. But, but Russia is coming out and basically trying to combat Trump on this. And they're trying to make light of the matter and trying to posture themselves. So it says here that Russian officials, meanwhile, said developments on the battlefield showed Ukraine is unable to reclaim the occupied territory and dismissed Trump's description of Russia as a paper tiger. Because he said, Russia isn't a tiger. It is more associated with the bear. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov says, there are no paper bears in Russia. Russia is the real bear. Oh, you are the real bear. But you know what kind of bear you are, bro? You're the bear that's been castrated and wearing diapers. Okay? You got no balls. You got no substance. You're shitting yourselves. So, yeah, you might want to reevaluate, man, because you're not doing well. And especially if the U.S. if Trump is going to support fully Zelensky and he's going to back the Ukrainians now have even more confidence to take the war forward. So, I don't know about you, man. I would, as a Russian, I would reevaluate the things that I said. Because, because remember, Ukraine is fighting a defensive war. They know the territory. They know everything. They know how to get in and out. They know the best spots to snipe. They know the best place to hide their troops. Anyways, I'm going to get out of that because, okay. Anyways, next story. Now let's leave we're going to go ahead and finally leave international politics and take a look at the domestic fight over something closer to home about free speech and late night television. So late night television, you're probably going to know that I'm going to talk about Jimmy Kimmel. Okay. Now Jimmy Kimmel, we know, not too long ago, was just let go from his job over at Disney. I think it was last week. But he was let go because of one thing that he said.
We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it.
The assassin of Charlie Kirk had nothing to do with MAGA.
And Bill O'Reilly is correct on this one because evidence is already out there that Tyler Robinson was definitely a leftist. The shell casing that was left at the scene clearly shows subliminal messages that links to a leftist ideology, such as, was it the Bella Ciao Ciao or Ciao Ciao Bella? And then there is the death to fascist or whatever that's there. And there's also concerns being raised by his family over the last several years that Tyler Robinson has drastically shifted to a very dark leftist point of view and has essentially alienated his family, and he has locked himself in his room and stuck around to just playing video games and being a loner and essentially becoming more and more radicalized by the professors at the university. Okay, right. I actually just drove past there several days after the Charlie Kirk shooting, and it was kind of sad. Anyways, that's besides the point. Okay, but the whole idea why I showed you this video is because I also want us to view the comeback monologue from Jimmy Kimmel that has drastically shifted in tone. He went from this asshole, unapologetic kind of guy at late night shows to this highly emotional and super apologetic. But the apology that he gives is kind of weird because I don't think he really gave an apology. So let's watch it and you guys judge for yourself.
I've been hearing a lot about what I need to say and do tonight. And the truth is, I don't think what I have to say is going to make much of a difference. If you like me, you like me. If you don't, you don't. I have no illusions about changing anyone's mind. But I do want to make something clear because it's important to me as a human. And that is, you understand that it was never my intention to make light of the murder of a young man. I don't think there's anything funny about it. I posted a message on Instagram on the day he was killed, sending love to his family and asking for compassion, and I meant it, and I still do. Nor was it my intention to blame any specific group for the actions of what it was obviously.
Okay, now here's another thing that we have to point out too. So we can hear that Jimmy Kimmel obviously has said that he reached out to the family and asked for the compassion, da 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 da. But did you notice one thing in that entire segment of the monologue? Was that he didn't mention once that he gave an apology to the Kirk family at all. Or the family of Tyler Robinson, falsely labeling their assassination, not an assassination expert because he obviously got caught, but their dumb assassinating son as a MAGA. Okay? He didn't give one apology. So how can I take his emotions and what he says here genuinely? Let's move on.
Deeply disturbed individual. That was really the opposite of the point I was trying to make, but I understand that to some that felt either ill-timed or unclear, or maybe both. And for those who think I did point a finger, I get why you're upset. If the situation was reversed, there's a good chance I'd have felt the same way. I have many friends and family members on the other side who I love and remain close to, even though we don't agree on politics at all. I don't think the murderer who shot Charlie Kirk represents anyone. This was a sick person who believed violence was a solution, and it isn't. Ever. And also selfishly.
Okay. So he now takes a stance that he stands against violence, okay? Political violence. This is drastically different than the monologue that he gave last week, because he was very antagonistic last time around. And he was highly sarcastic, highly disrespectful, and just really had the I don't give a fuck attitude last time around. And to see him do a complete 180 like this, like I said before, it's like boy crying wolf, man. I want to believe you, but I just can't. Let's keep going.
I am a person who gets a lot of threats. I get many ugly and scary threats against my life, my wife, my kids, my coworkers because of what I choose to say. And I know those threats don't come from the kind of people on the right who I know and love. So that's what I wanted to say on that subject. There was a moment over the weekend, a very beautiful moment. I don't know if you saw this. On Sunday, Erica Kirk forgave the man who shot her husband. She forgave him. That is an example we should follow. Yeah. If you believe in the teachings of Jesus as I do, there it was. That's it. A selfless act of grace, forgiveness from a grieving widow. It touched me deeply. And I hope it...
Okay, I mean, he sounds genuine. I want to believe him, but I really can't. Like I said before, it's like he's shedding tears. He is, saying that Erica Kirk is this, he's basically praising her for being able to forgive the man that killed her husband, okay? But the thing that caught me about the whole thing, that I just have to call bullshit on, is how he says the part where he talks about according to the teachings of Jesus Christ.
The teachings of Jesus as I do, there it was. That's
okay. This is what he said. If you believe in the teachings of Jesus like I do, I don't know about you. I don't know his faith. I don't know how many times he goes to church. I don't know what he is, but to me, I'm a Christian. I go to church regularly. I serve at my community, Rock Harbor Church, here in Meridian, Idaho. Jimmy Kimmel, to me, gives me the vibe as being the most godless guy on the planet, okay? So for him to come out and say that, I call bullshit, and that's highly disrespectful. And Jimmy Kimmel, if you really are a Christian and you say that you are and you believe in the teachings of Jesus Christ and you go to church and all this, prove it to me. Prove it to us. Because right now, you're a boy crying wolf. And we're calling you bullshit, okay? But now that we see this, I think we've seen enough, because essentially this is the same thing over and over again. And then he goes on to, I think, blaming the FCC for trying to shut him down. I'm paraphrasing. I don't know. So we'll figure it out. Okay? So why is this topic so important? Because now Democrats are trying to introduce a bill to protect free speech following Kimmel suspension. Kimmel suspension. Okay? What happened to the suspension of Tucker Carlson? What happened to the firing of Roseanne Barr? What happened to the firing of Megyn Kelly? I mean, all of these voices you hear, they're getting shut down and they're getting censored by the federal government of the Biden administration, last administration. Where were they? Where were the Democrats to defend their rights? Where was the ACLU to defend their rights? Tim Allen got shut down because he was a conservative. Okay? And he is not the only one. There are numerous celebrities out there that are so afraid to come out with their political views, because that is essentially their livelihood. Okay? So let's keep going into the story. After ABC suspended comedian Jimmy Kimmel's late night show following a threat from the head of the Federal Communications Commission, congressional Democrats have denounced the Trump administration's threats against political critics and unveiled a bill that would bolster free speech protections against government officials. Okay. Really? You want to unveil a bill that would bolster free speech protection against government officials, okay? What happened during COVID? Anyone that questioned the efficacy of the vaccines instantly shut down. Anybody that questioned the credibility of Fauci or the FDA shut down instantly. Where were you guys? And now you want to come out and try to protect Jimmy Kimmel and come out with some free speech protection bill? Are you freaking serious? Let's continue. While the bill is unlikely to gain traction in a Republican-controlled Congress, Democrats harshly criticized the Trump administration for pressuring ABC towards the suspension of Jimmy Kimmel's show, following his comments on how Republicans were responding to the fatal shooting of Charlie Kirk. Okay, so here's the thing. I think the head of the FCC had made a comment on a news channel. I don't know exactly what his name is, but I know he made a comment on a news channel that says anybody like this, it was his opinion that if he had the power to, he would shut down any types of misinformation like that. And that was a clear misinformation. There is clear evidence that it is misinformation. Because Jimmy Kimmel was going around and labeling Tyler Robinson as being the part of the MAGA movement when he really wasn't. He was clearly a leftist. He even had a trans boyfriend, girlfriend. Look, I'm not going to get into it. I don't even know how to classify it. The whole pronoun, he, they, them, whatever. Okay. But for them to come out and do that, it really makes no sense, because the FCC never actually filed an official injunction or filed an official claim on the record that is saying they want ABC to shut Jimmy Kimmel's show down. In reality, what it was that brought Jimmy Kimmel down was the local TV stations. Local TV stations out there, I believe there's Nexus, and there's another company that controls about, I think, 60% share of the local TV networks. Okay? And their viewers, their sponsors, and everything got pissed at what Jimmy Kimmel said. And they pressured ABC and Disney to do something, because if they don't, they were going to completely take the Jimmy Kimmel show completely off the air for such disrespect and such misinformation. Well, that's the truth. You can go and look it up. I'm not hiding anything. I found out about this through various research, and it is the same thing that is being reported on the PBD podcast. Okay? So there's that. Now, Jimmy Kimmel said earlier this week that many in the MAGA land are working very hard to capitalize on the assassination, and that President Donald Trump's political supporters were trying to characterize the man charged in the attack as anything other than one of them. Well, here's the deal, man. Just look at what you said. If you're going to get pissed off, if you're not going to get pissed off at somebody disrespecting your movement like that, I mean, I would be kind of pissed for such bad labeling and characterization of a person. Okay, so the head of the FCC chairman, his name is Brendan Carr. Okay. Well, this I know. It says that he subsequently called Kimmel's comments truly sick and said his agency had a strong case for holding the Kimmel Network parent Walt Disney Company accountable for spreading misinformation. Disney is seeking approval from the FCC for ESPN's acquisition of the NFL Network. Okay, so this was largely by Disney a business deal, as you can truly see. Now, you see right there, if Brendan Carr had actually submitted an official complaint and has actually submitted an official injunction against the Jimmy Kimmel show and ABC and Disney, it would have been clearly reported here. It would have been going out like wildfire. And the fact that it's not, and the only thing that they got were comments saying that, ooh, Brendan Carr said the comments were truly sick. And that's all they got. That right there, you know your facts. The left will never leave any facts that they can use out. Okay? And they clearly don't have anything. And here's the kicker for the entire deal. Disney is seeking approval from the FCC for ESPN's acquisition of the NFL Network. The decision to drop Jimmy Kimmel is largely a business decision, because they cannot risk Jimmy Kimmel opening his mouth for any second more that could jeopardize this acquisition of the NFL Network by ESPN. You see how the circle goes around? So Jimmy Kimmel, MAGA had nothing to do with your letting go the first time around. It's a business decision. So really, get your head out of your ass. Yeah. And Democrats, really, you just need to shut the hell up, because you guys are the most hypocritical group of people on the planet, or a group of politicians on the planet, that wants to call Republicans and conservatives and independents who are denouncing what Jimmy Kimmel said and trying to protect what he said as protecting free speech, when you shut down every single critic of your party, of your bullshit vaccination agenda, amongst other things, or even a Hunter Biden laptop. We didn't forget about it. We didn't forget about Burisma. We know. Let's move on. So the next story, we're looking to the Charlie Kirk Memorial and the political violence. So thousands gathered at Charlie Kirk's memorial, which blended religion, politics, and grief into what many saw as a rallying cry for conservatives. And really, it was. It is sad that it had to come to the fact that we had to lose one of our own, one of our very best, and one that obviously would have been president had events not turned out the way it did. Okay, now which brings us to the central event that set much of this into motion, Charlie Kirk's memorial service. So thousands gathered at Kirk's memorial, which blended religion, politics, and grief into what many saw as a rallying cry for conservatives. And it's true. One of us got killed. And he got killed for having an open dialogue and trying to achieve conversation and consensus and trying to understand the other side. Now, if we are able of that type of violence for someone trying to have a conversation with the other side, what other heinous acts are we capable of in our political future? What are we going to turn to? Are we going to turn into a dictatorship? Are we going to turn into a third world country? Are we going to turn to Russia, where we just eliminate our opponents right off the get-go? I mean, they tried to do that with Trump. And look what happened. He's our president, and he's probably the strongest president we've ever had in a long time. Look, love him or hate him, he's doing his job. Admit it. Admit it, because Joe Biden didn't do a damn thing. Whatever you want, however you want to support him, however you want to find facts about it, you're going to be lacking, because Trump essentially has achieved more in the last 9 months than Joe Biden has done in 4 years. So let's keep going with this story. So how does the framing of Charlie Kirk, okay, how does the framing of him as a martyr change the political narrative around his assassination? So, it's hard for me to think about this because he was such a good guy. He did things that a lot of us were afraid to do, even me, because of the potential violence that we saw. And the fact that he lasted so long without a upfront confrontation, without getting punched in the face or anything like that, is amazing. But he literally took a bullet for all of us because we were too afraid to. And he became a martyr for the movement because we didn't have the balls to stand up ourselves, and he did. And he woke us all up to the capacity for violence that the left has, the capacity for heinous actions that these communists that label themselves as Democrat socialists or socialist Democrats, however you want to label them. At the end, they're communists following a Leninist ideology, using violence to curtail the rise of their opponents, and they will keep doing that if we don't stand up to them, okay? But the main concerning thing that I have with all of this, I love Charlie Kirk. I love what he did for Christianity. I love how he is the reason for the Second Awakening, okay? But the blending of religion and politics can be a slippery slope in such events, because while it deepens unity for the base, it can also alienate others, especially when such strong emotions are around. And I hope that this administration does its best to not leave anybody behind politically. And that the new phenomenon of religion and politics being so deeply intertwined, it harkens back to almost the utopian world that utopian is a bad term, but the perfect society that our founding fathers created, where church was essentially the heart of the community, and it influenced the philosophies and the rationalities of each political decision. However, this can also lead towards theocracy if we are not careful. So America, this is our golden moment. What do we choose to do? Do we choose to rise as a society, as a rational society, a secular society, influenced by Judeo-Christian teachings, and building a cohesive unit? Or Do we force the religion down the throats of our populace and form a theocracy? This is a slippery slope that we must navigate. And I hope Trump can curtail whatever that comes. Okay. So with the Charlie Kirk assassination, and in the last couple of years, we've seen Trump getting shot. Well, Trump got shot twice. Well, I think once. No, yeah. Shot. The 2 assassination attempts, one time the shot actually happened. He nicked him in the ear. And by God, if he hadn't turned that half an inch, he would have been dead. Somebody's watching over him. Somebody wants him here. He didn't sacrifice Trump, but he sacrificed and martyred Charlie Kirk. Trump was needed for the great work. Charlie Kirk was needed as the martyr to wake us up. And it sucks that his death had to be the wake-up call that we needed, because no one should ever go out like that. But I thank you, God, that he brought it, because now we finally realize the truth. And it's opening a lot of people's eyes that violence and assassinations in the political realm is not an exception for the United States. Okay? We are just as capable, and we are going down a very dark road. So, what's going to happen? What can we expect in the next 4 years, the next 8, the next 12? So, it's scary. But I have high hopes that if Trump is able to have a stable mind and good health and not fall into any type of cognitive decline like our great cup of Joe, I think we'll be okay. But we never know. Things can happen. So, now, as we've seen today, politics in America is no longer confined to just the Capitol Hill. It's playing out in the world stage, in the late night TV studios, and even at memorial services. The question is, where do we go from here? So, that's basically it for tonight's show, guys. Apparently, we don't have time to cover the Trump Tylenol story, but we'll have that for the next episode. So, going forward, how I'm going to be doing this, every episode will be released twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And as I build a following and build a subscriber base, once I hit 1,000 subscribers, I will also start incorporating interviews with interesting people that I want to talk about. And by interesting, I don't just mean political figures. I don't just mean lawyers or anything like that. I have a lot of interests. I am a history nut. I love freaking UFOs. I love, dinosaurs. I like astronomy and religion, all these things. So the guest that I intend to bring is going to be very wide range. And I want to bring my guests based on who I want to talk to and whether the topic that they are known for I find interesting. So it'll be fun. Anyways, guys, so that's all for today's episode of the Afshari Unbound podcast. We've covered Trump at the UN, the shutdown standoff, NATO tensions, free speech battles, and the political aftermath of the Kirk Memorial. Don't forget to subscribe and send us your thoughts in the comments below, okay? We'd love to know what you think about America's political future. Thank you, and see you on the next one.